Welcome to We Got Balls, real, raw, masculine sex talk with Chris Inman and Scott Cohn. Chris and Scott both work with men who want to leave their unwanted sexual struggles in the past. They are willing to do whatever it takes to help men get curious about what drives their compulsive sexual behavior. With that said, here we go.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We're glad to be with everybody on the podcast. Aren't you, Scott?
I am very glad to be here, Chris. Thank you for having me again.
Well, we're in this together for the long haul, dude.
To our podcast. Thank you for inviting me to our podcast today.
I said, no, being with everybody else is what I'm saying, because we're here. We're doing this project. We've just gotten some great feedback in the last few days about what we're doing and just really excited about where this is going. And today we have a sexy topic. As if we don't ever have a sexy topic, right? I mean, all of our topics are sexy. But we're going to be talking about MILFs. And a MILF, if you've been buried somewhere in a backyard and have no idea, is moms I'd like to F. And we're not going to, be explicit about all that. But I'm a history guy. If you know me, I love to trace back the roots of stuff. And the history of this term actually occurred mostly in my lifetime. Probably all of it's probably in your lifetime, right, Scott? The Graduate is kind of where it all began. Did you ever have any exposure to The Graduate when you were really young?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I think the first movie that I saw that featured this theme of kind of the older woman seducing the younger guy was The Summer of 42 or something. I forget what exactly it was called, but I remember it distinctly because I found it to be really arousing. And it was this really beautiful, she had been a model, Jennifer, we got to find the name, but this was her first acting gig. And so she played this woman whose husband had died in World War II. And this young guy who was a teenager ends up becoming her lover. And I remember that one of the scenes that's the most distinct is this guy, like he's a high school senior or whatever. And he goes to try to buy a condom for the first time at the drugstore and how he fumbled around. And I was watching that probably when I was 10 years old, now that I think about that. The Summer of 42. And it had a theme song and it was very romantic. And it's a trope. Like this is seen, and we kind of touched on this in one of our earlier episodes, but actually, let me just go into this now about male sexual abuse, because male sexual abuse is much more common than people realize. The statistics that are published, I've seen, are 1 out of every 6 men is sexually abused before their 18th birthday. I think in reality, and most clinicians and most therapists would agree that it's probably much higher than that. And there's a number of reasons for that, mainly because there's so much shame that men feel in sexual abuse. It's uniquely shameful to men. It's damaging to everybody, but it's uniquely shameful for men because the majority of men are sexually abused by other men, frankly. And most of the time those men are either relatives or there's somebody that the victim knows really well. And so it puts them in a really tremendous bind of, I can't report this because this is somebody in my family. It's somebody I care about. It's a coach. It's a Bible study teacher, so on and so forth. But, in general, women do sexually abuse men. It's much smaller in percentage compared to the number of men that sexually abuse men, but it's minimized and dismissed in the culture by and large because it's seen as, well, the woman's doing the boy a favor, right? So you've got this teenage boy and hot mom down the street seduces him, and it's the tropes in the Hollywood movies, and Hollywood loves to pound this drum about this is an initiation rite for a young man, to have an older woman come on to him.
Yeah. So this gets into my genre in the 90s with American Pie, because just like all the TNA movies of 80s and 90s, exactly what you said, the goal for a man is to lose his virginity, to have a sexual experience. And what American Pie introduced, as well as, which the theme of the movie was, we're all going to have sex before we graduate, was there was one character who was targeting a mom. Stifler's mom was the MILF in American Pie. And so you have this whole narrative, and they start chanting and using that language. And that language was kind of around, floating around the 90s, but it really became like forefront of the culture. So much so that there was not only this idea of that kind of older woman concept on places like MTV and VH1, there was a song called Stacy's Mom by Fountains of Wayne, which was a huge hit back when videos were actually music videos instead of YouTube videos. You know, back before when you had a channel, you go clue to that. But
when
all these young
MTV actually had music on it.
you got it. We're dating ourselves, so we need to shut up.
We're ancient.
So, yeah, but that's this idea is this was like this was a viral video, really, is what it was of this song of a voluptuous, and I forget which supermodel. It was one of the supermodels back in the early 2000s who was playing this mom character.
Christy Brinkley.
I don't know. We'll do the research and include the guys. If you guys can figure that out, put it in our notes on the YouTube channel or on any of the podcast platforms.
Yeah, so, we got balls T-shirt is coming your way if you can answer that question.
You got it. Drop those balls. That's what we're doing. That's the slogan. So, but that's this idea of this older woman who is seducing the younger man, and it's not abusive in culture. It's actually fetishized. It's actually seen as something that is desirable. I mean, case in point, and we've talked about this before, Saturday Night Live sketches, specifically the one with Pete Davidson where he's having sex with the teacher. Of course, that goes back to an old Van Halen song in the 80s, Hot for Teacher. But it's this idea that I get to bring into my sexual fantasy, into my arousal template, this confident, mature, older woman who can be a guide to me, who can show me things, who can teach me things. But that's not considered abusive. And I think to your point, it absolutely has an abusive element. Anytime an older person, especially, is engaging with someone who's a minor, who's under the age of 18 and not able to consent, and I think we want to cover that basis. We are against, in any way, shape, or form, any type of sexual exposure to someone who is not able to say, I'm a willing participant in this. That we have to engage this idea of what is this fantasy of the older, more mature woman who comes to be with me, teach me, eroticize me, arouse me, bring me to climax. Why are so many guys fascinated with this and they fantasize about that?
So, yeah, and to that point, let's look at, because we've been talking about Pornhub 2022 year in review, and I just want to give you the most searched for terms of the year. Now, these are not the videos, but there is a correlation between what people are searching for and what they're actually viewing. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the seventh most searched for term is stepmom, which is a version of MILF that incorporates incest as a theme. And then, the number 3 term is MILF itself. I just skipped over that. So this is an extremely popular category of porn when you consider that both MILF and stepmom are in the top 10 most searched for terms annually on Pornhub is in terms of last year for videos that people are looking for. So what's really going on there? Because there's a number of different dynamics in there. So you mentioned some of those. One is it's this theme of initiation, right? Culturally, when does a man become a man? What do we believe culturally about that? When he has sex.
I mean, I think, practically it's these mile markers. The one of sex is kind of like the crossing over in Western culture. Graduating from school and being in a relationship, sure. But I think, and again, we're talking about this from a place of the core identity of who I am as a person. I think that intimate connection, having sex, really is the defining characteristic in our culture.
It is. And, it's been that way probably for about 50, maybe 60 years. But traditionally in human history, that wasn't the marker for when a boy becomes a man. And that whole transition was mediated by the men in the society. So you think about Jewish males, for example. a Jewish male goes through an initiation rite called a bar mitzvah when they're 13, when they start entering puberty traditionally, and they're welcomed into the community of adults by men who recognize their masculinity. And what is it that makes them a man? It's the bar mitzvah. They're the son of righteousness. They can interpret the scriptures properly. They've memorized the Torah, and now they are a full-fledged member of the community. And so there were always kind of markers in multiple cultures throughout history on what that transition from boyhood to manhood meant. And in the Western world, we've kind of disposed with that and replaced it with the idea of, well, when you can have sex, that's when you become a man. So if you go through puberty at 13 or 12 years old, which is kind of the average age for puberty now, you can have sex then. Does that make you a man? And for what we know from an interpersonal neurobiology standpoint is the human brain is not formed as an adult brain until the third decade of our lives. We're not capable of making adult decisions until you're in your 30s, early 30s.
So Scott, is that why as a younger man, I'm looking for a guide? I'm looking for an older woman maybe to shepherd me into masculinity? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think so what's happened is men who were traditionally the ones who shepherded a boy into manhood, that's now been replaced in the fatherless America, because we have a fatherless America is what we have.
Yeah.
So boys grow up without their dads. So who is now initiating them into manhood? It's a woman. It's an older woman. Yeah. So what's happened is masculine transition has been outsourced to females, which I think is horrendously damaging to the culture overall, because masculinity, in my view, is developed in a fraternity. It's when other men recognize your gifts, your calling, what you're good at, and they say, you're really good at that, man. You really have, and you join in that sense of competitiveness. You know, men bond differently than women. Men bond through vasopressin. So men bond by doing stuff with other men that's a little competitive. It's got some challenge to it. And at the end of the activity we're doing, we high five one another, and that releases a lot of vasopressin. It makes me believe I can do stuff. I belong with other guys. I can do hard stuff. We don't have that in the culture now. You just go take your clothes off and have sex with somebody. And that's what these fantasies are tapping into, is this outsourcing of masculinity to the female and helping me view myself as a man because of that. So that's one kind of sub theme, I think, that's cultural in nature, which is, again, when we talk about how our sexual arousal develops, it's not just in our families. It's not just the things that we do. It's the messages that are sent to us, a lot of the times very subtly and not overtly, through the culture itself. So we started off this episode talking about movies that impacted your and my life. The Graduate. The Graduate is that classic Hollywood tale of the college age guy that's seduced by the cougar mom, and it was an extremely influential and popular movie. The Summer of 42, and this has gone on and on and on throughout television and movies, and it's a major theme in pornography as well. So it's jammed at you through kind of typical media, and then it's jammed at you through the pornographic side of culture, and it's tapping into a deep part of our psyche, which is, as a younger male, you want to be initiated, you want to be taught how to have sex.
So let's talk about that, because I think when you mentioned, my dad wasn't there, I think in my story, and I think really in both of our stories, my dad was there physically. My dad was a provider. My dad showed up. I mean, my parents were divorced when I was older, but my dad showed up and was there for the visits, and he showed up at the sporting events, and he coached the teams that he could coach. And there was a physical presence of masculinity there. But for me, the appeal of a woman to teach me what it means to be a man was a lack of emotional presence, a lack of emotional attunement. And I think what you're talking about in that initiation, that connection, is not only are you with other guys, and yes, you can be doing adventurous things and and be competitive. And that's not necessarily the case in every circumstance. But what is absolutely required, isn't it, is to have a male presence who is attuning, is seeing me as a younger boy, seeing my heart and shepherding me into what it means to do the hard things in life with that community surrounding me. Isn't that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. And so in the absence of that, it creates a lot of emotional, like if you don't have a dad that's present, either emotionally or physically present to show you how to do that, what's going to fill that vacuum? It's going to be something that's intense, that's kind of immediate, that gives you a lot of pleasure, because it creates a lot of confusion and pain in a young guy's life when he isn't brought into that. And so pornography, again, is a great teacher. If you're not going to teach your children about sexuality and how to be a man or how to be a woman, pornography will teach you. It's happy to teach you. It's all going to be sexualized, though. And that's where this particular theme becomes really popular, is just the legions of young people. Again, the average age of exposure to porn is now 8 years of age. That's a couple years before puberty. And it starts to groom the kids to start to expect certain things from their pornographic experience. And one of those things that I think it's grooming them to expect is for the older woman to be the seductress and to be the guide into how you actually have sex. So that's why these both stepmom and MILF themes are very highly sought after. And they play this role of, in the fantasy kind of template, of helping you imagine what it would be like to have an older woman care for you, which may be speaking to some mother wounds, right?
Sure.
The nurture, the care, the tenderness, but also it's addressing a father wound of not having a dad there to show me how to be a man. And these women, typically in the video, the scenario goes like this. The older woman is playful, or she's very seductive, and she goes right after the younger guy. And man, that taps into that sense of, I want to be desired, I want to be pursued, and I want to know how to do this basic function of having sex, which is kind of core to what it means to be a man in our view.
Well, and a lot of those videos, sad to say that I know this, but I do, start out with a young man masturbating, and he's caught in the act by the older woman.
Oh yeah, that's,
and so there's that shame that's baked in. And so rather, a guy catch another guy doing that would be like, either, hey man, what are you doing? Or, oh, I'll give you your space. Or
let me join in.
But or let's that's another genre. We'll get to that podcast coming soon to We Got Balls near you. So that's this idea of you have this baked in shame. Oh, I shouldn't be doing this. But then rather than scolding or rather than shaming, she comes in and gets curious. She's a little bit compassionate and kind, but then almost immediately she strips her clothes off and starts to please and pleasure the young boy. So there's that perfect fit into the addiction cycle, that shame, fantasy, ritual, acting out cycle, which is I go right from shame to, yes, this is what I was thinking about, a woman seeing me and coming to me and pleasuring me. And here it is. And so it's like a black hole, dude. It just sucks people in to all of these emotional components that you want to connect with all in one scenario, right?
Right. And let's remember that 95% of our mental activity is operating below the radar of conscious awareness. So, our conscious lives are like the tip of the iceberg that sits above the waterline, and below it is all of this other emotional and relational dynamic that we don't even think about unless we take time to sit back and go, why is that so arousing to me? And yet it fills those vacuums that might exist in our home relationships. So a lot of this goes back to, what was my relationship with my mom growing up? Did I feel like she was attentive to me? Did I feel like she was caring and nurturing? Or did I feel like she was aloof and hostile, or just disengaged and kind of doing her own thing, or strict? And so much of what we look for in our fantasy lives, as we're going to continue to stress over and over again, we fantasize about the opposite of what we've been experiencing in our reality. That's just the nature of fantasy. It helps us imagine a different world where things don't go quite as painfully, emotionally disruptively as we've experienced. And this fantasy about MILFs and stepmoms is tapping right into that brokenness that I might feel in my relationship with my mom. If I grow up with a really nervous mom or really anxious mom, or I have to kind of attend to my mom's emotional needs because I happen to be closer to her than my dad is, then I become her surrogate husband, right? We call that enmeshment or triangulation. And it's a form of almost emotional incest, with you will, if you will. So when I'm working with a guy, maybe you can relate to this too, is if I'm working with a guy and I see kind of the incest, the stepmom theme showing up in his porn searches and his porn usage, I get really curious about, tell me more about what your relationship with your mother was like. Because I think the MILF and the stepmom genre is tapping into a brokenness that young guys grow up with in relationship to their mothers in some way. So it's a mommy issue, right?
I think it can be, and I want to make this point, and we'll come back to this a number of times. I know it's also not literally I want to have sex with my mom.
No,
not literally.
No,
but it is symbolic of a desire for nurture, but it's also learning to, as porn teaches us so well, to objectify people and situations to soothe that wounded part of our hearts.
Yeah, because, so you're using intense and immediate pleasure to escape the emotional pain of having a distant, aloof mom. And now I'm imagining...
Or an emotionally distant dad, whichever, you know.
And so I imagine a scenario where not only is my mom nurturing and caring, but she wants to introduce me to sexuality. And I'm watching this incredible experience of merging and bonding. And, you know, again, at the heart of it, what is sex all about? It's not just about sticking part A into part B. It's about the sense of I'm connected. I can merge with that other person. I belong. I'm pursued. I'm wanted. And so often then when we have really deep wounds around that with our mothers and fathers, it ends up showing up in our sexual fantasies as a way to try to bring some sense of relief and escape from that. So, it's not... Well, and I'm really into incest, but there's a lot of shame around that, right? So I don't want to tell anybody that I'm watching stepmom porn, because that's really perverted.
Well, and I think it is just like everything else that we're doing. It's becoming less and less so. It's this degradation, this, you know, bringing everything down to the base level of, I want to have sex with older women. I like cougars, and it's this like this internal identification with what we went back to earlier in the discussion, which is sex is the thing that defines me. If sex defines me and I can have sex with an older woman and she can be my guide and my nurturer, so be it. And it's moving away from what you just said, which is I want to have connection. And I'll add another word to that: mutual connection. It's not just a sexual experience. It's I want to be with someone. I want to be with a partner. I want to be with someone who's like me and cares for me and sees me over the long term. And yes, sexual connection is part of that, but ultimately that withness, that partnership, that is what I'm really longing for as a human being. Because frankly, and if you're a young guy, trigger warning, sex doesn't last forever. Bodies change, arousal changes, energy changes, physical ability changes. What you think of as sexual intercourse as being sex and sex acts, you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and that is a harder and harder thing as you get older to deal with. So if you're young and you're 20 and I need to get the most I can right now, there is this lust, and I don't mean that in like a moral sense. There's this, I got to get as much as I can. And it feels like in this particular category, this is a very lusty category. Yes, there's a woman. She's older. Yeah, she's maybe my stepmom, but I'll go for it. To hell with the consequences.
So there's an important thing that we haven't really said it. I'm just going to name it. But the power dynamic is really strong in this particular category of porn, because the woman has power over the younger man. She seduces him.
Yep.
She teaches him how to have sex. She teaches him how to be better at sex. But the other aspect of this is, and this is maybe kind of looking at it from the female perspective, there are cougars, there are women that seek younger men to have sex with. What is the dynamic that's involved there? Well, an older woman who wants to have sex with a younger man is not really interested in a relationship. She just wants the sex. And the younger men know this. They're not looking to have a relationship with a woman that's their mother's age or their grandmother's age. And by the way, GILF, grannies I'd like to have, is a popular genre as well. You'd think, ooh, that's gross. But there's some beautiful older women, and it's tapping into this vein of, I can be sexual with that woman, but I don't ever have to have a relationship. So you talk about objectifying the relationship. It completely puts it in that vein of, hey, this is a chance for me to experiment, to get really good at sex with an older, experienced woman who can tutor me and train me. And then I can go, for my part, for somebody I really want to have sex with, I'm going to go for the nubile, vivacious, barely legal types.
Yeah, so it's the other end of the spectrum. I've gone from the experienced, and really I think American Pie is the perfect package of that. Is on one end you've got the experienced teacher, and on the other end you've got the innocent, you're the one that has the power dynamic over the younger female. And so now you get to experience the other end of that.
Yep.
So I think what we've done is we've opened up a can of worms, as we always do. I mean, heck, what have you come to expect from these conversations? If you're listening and you're like, what the hell? Exactly. That's why we're talking about it, because there's so many pieces, from sexual abuse to power dynamics to arousal template to mother issues, father issues. It's all in the stew, right? It's all in the question mark of what is this bringing up for you?
And what we're saying in that, Chris, is it's really complex. It's not a simple, there is no silver bullet to decoding these. You have to really get into what are the visual sexual cues, what are the psychological dynamics involved that makes that arousing, and what are the parts of my own narrative, my own experience with other people and in my family dynamics and with sexual abuse and my developing sexuality that all mix together to create this cocktail we call arousal.
Yep. And so we want to keep pursuing that. So we hope you'll join us again for another conversation, and look below in the notes or check the end credits for how to reach out to us and connect. We are excited to continue to have these conversations with you, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, Scott.
Bye, Chris.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris at pornfreemasculinity.com and with Scott at successfulmen.com.